He used to believe that love was something loud, that it announced itself in grand gestures, in dramatic confessions, in promises spoken under stars or whispered in the dark. When he was younger, love felt like fire, urgent, consuming, impossible to ignore. But by the time he met her, his life had already taught him that fire burns out if it isn't tended carefully. Her name was Claire. They met on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that never warns you it's about to change your life. The sky was pale, undecided between sun and rain. He was sitting in a quiet cafe, laptop open, pretending to work while really just trying to escape the noise of his own thoughts. She walked in carrying a book, her hair still damp from the rain, a crease between her eyebrows, as if she were always halfway through a serious thought. She sat at the table across from him. No sparks, no dramatic moment, just a brief glance, a polite smile, and then silence. And yet, something settled. It was the kind of connection that didn't demand attention. It didn't rush him. It simply existed, steady and calm, like a deep breath he didn't realize he had been holding for years. They started talking because the cafe ran out of oat milk. It was a small inconvenience, almost laughable. She joked about it. He smiled. And suddenly they were talking about books, about cities they had loved and left, about how strange it felt to be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. Their words didn't overlap. They didn't try to impress each other. It felt easy. That was the first thing he noticed about Claire. She made silence feel safe. Their relationship didn't explode into existence. It unfolded slowly, the way dawn creeps in without asking permission. Coffee turned into walks. Walks turned into shared dinners, then shared weekends, then shared keys left on the counter like an unspoken agreement. He learned her routines before he realized he was paying attention. How she needed a few minutes of quiet in the morning. How she always reread the same page when she was anxious. How she laughed softly, as if afraid of taking up too much space with her joy. She learned his too, that he avoided talking about his childhood, that he went silent when he felt overwhelmed, that he showed love through consistency rather than words, always showing up, always being there, even when he didn't know how to say what he felt. For a long time, that was enough. They built a life that looked stable from the outside. A small apartment with mismatched furniture, plants that somehow survived despite their neglect. Evenings spent on the couch, legs tangled, the TV murmuring while they lived quietly inside their own world. People would tell them they were lucky, and they were, in many ways. But love, he would later learn, isn't just about comfort. It's also about attention, the kind you give even when you're tired, even when life pulls at you from every direction. The change didn't happen suddenly. It happened in inches. He started working longer hours, not because he loved his job, but because it felt safer than confronting the parts of himself that felt unfinished. He told himself he was doing it for their future, for stability, for security. And maybe part of him believed that. Claire never complained at first. She adapted. She always did. She learned to eat dinner alone, to save stories for later, to silence her disappointment before it reached her lips. She told herself this was what adult love looked like: patience, understanding, sacrifice. But something inside her began to ache quietly. He noticed the signs but misread them. He saw her staring out the window longer than usual and thought she was tired. He noticed her smile didn't quite reach her eyes and assumed she was stressed. When she asked, "Do you ever feel like we're drifting?" he laughed softly and said, "It's just a phase. We're fine." And maybe they were. But fine is a dangerous word, because it sounds like peace when sometimes it's just resignation wearing a calm expression. The nights grew quieter. They still slept in the same bed, but the space between them felt wider than the room itself. Conversations became logistical. Groceries, bills, schedules. The kind of words that keep a household running, but slowly starve a relationship. Claire tried to bridge the distance. She suggested trips, long talks, small rituals, Sunday walks, phone-free dinners, handwritten notes left in his bag. He appreciated them, but he didn't prioritize them. He thought love could survive on intention alone. He didn't realize she was slowly teaching herself how to live without needing him. There was one evening that stayed with her. She had been waiting for him. Dinner cold, candles melted into uneven wax pools. He arrived late, apologetic but distracted, phone still glowing in his hand. She started to speak about her day, about something that had made her feel small and invisible. And he nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. Halfway through her sentence, she stopped talking. He didn't notice. That was the moment something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically. Something inside her closed the door. She began to grieve the version of them she had believed in. The one where love was not just shared space, but shared presence. And he, sitting right there, never saw it happen. Because love doesn't always leave with slammed doors or angry words. Sometimes it leaves quietly, while both people are still in the room. After that evening, nothing officially changed. There were no arguments, no dramatic confessions, no tears spilled across the kitchen floor. Life continued to move forward exactly as it always had. And that was the most painful part, because Claire was still there. She still asked how his day was. She still remembered his favorite meals, still folded his clothes with the same quiet care, still reached for his hand when they crossed the street. But something in her had shifted inward, like a light dimmed just enough that only she noticed the darkness growing. And slowly, he began to feel it too. At first, it came as an unease he couldn't name. A sense that something essential was missing, like walking into a familiar room and realizing a piece of furniture had been moved. Everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. She laughed less. When she did, it sounded careful, controlled. Her joy no longer spilled freely into the space between them. Conversations ended sooner. Silences stretched longer. And when he tried to close the distance, an arm around her waist, a casual kiss on her temple, she accepted it, but without leaning in. That was new. He told himself he was imagining things. Work was stressful. Life was busy. This was what long-term relationships looked like, right? Comfortable, predictable, quiet. But predictability has a sound when it becomes loneliness. It hums. He started noticing how often she stayed up later than him, sitting on the couch with a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders, scrolling through her phone or staring at nothing at all. When he asked what she was thinking about, she'd smile softly and say, "Nothing important." And that answer terrified him more than any argument ever could. Because once upon a time, everything had been important enough to share. He remembered how she used to talk, with her hands, with her whole body leaning forward, eyes bright, as if she was inviting him into her inner world. Now, she kept that world guarded, as if protecting something fragile from further disappointment. One night, he woke up and realized she wasn't beside him. He found her in the living room, sitting on the floor, back against the couch. The room was dark except for the faint glow of the city through the window. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "Just couldn't sleep." He sat beside her. Their shoulders touched, but it felt like miles apart. For a moment, he considered asking the question that had been growing heavier inside him for weeks. "Are you still happy with me?" But fear stopped him. Fear that the answer would confirm what he wasn't ready to face. So instead, he said nothing. And silence, once again, did the damage for him. The truth was, Claire had been asking herself a different question for months. How long can I keep loving someone who doesn't really see me anymore? She had tried to explain it once, twice, in subtle ways, then in clearer ones. But every time she opened her mouth, she felt like she was asking for too much. More attention, more presence, more care. She didn't want to beg for love. She wanted it to be chosen. So she began choosing herself instead, quietly, carefully, without resentment. She started going on long walks alone. She reconnected with old friends. She picked up hobbies she had abandoned when life became about them. And the more she rebuilt her inner world, the more she realized how empty she had felt inside the relationship. That realization broke her heart, because she still loved him. Love doesn't disappear just because it hurts. It lingers. It aches. It waits. But one morning, as she watched him rush out the door without noticing the note she'd left on the counter, a simple, "I hope you have a good day," something inside her finally reached its limit. She sat down at the table and cried quietly, hands pressed against her face, mourning not just the relationship, but the version of herself she had become while trying to keep it alive alone. That evening, when he came home, she asked him to sit down. Her voice didn't shake. That scared him. "I don't think you're doing this on purpose," she said gently. "And that's what makes it so hard. You don't mean to hurt me, but you do." He opened his mouth to respond, to explain, to defend himself. But for the first time, he stopped and listened. Really listened. She told him how lonely she felt next to him. How invisible. How exhausting it was to keep hoping he'd notice without her having to ask. She told him she didn't need perfection, just presence. When she finished, she didn't cry. She just looked tired. And in that moment, everything he had been avoiding rushed toward him all at once. Guilt, regret, fear, and a deep, aching realization. He had mistaken stability for love. He had assumed that because she stayed, she was okay. He had believed that good intentions were enough. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. But love without attention eventually feels like abandonment. That sentence settled into his chest like a weight he couldn't shake. She didn't give him an ultimatum. She didn't threaten to leave. She simply told him the truth, and then leaned back, waiting to see what he would do with it. Because sometimes, the most powerful moment in a relationship isn't when someone walks away. It's when they stop chasing and let the other person decide whether they're worth choosing. He didn't answer her that night. Not because he didn't care, but because for the first time in his life, he understood that words were no longer enough. They went to bed separately. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Just apart. And that was how the next weeks unfolded too. He tried at first. He really did. He put his phone down during dinner, asked questions, and waited for real answers. Planned small things, coffee together in the morning, a walk after work, a weekend without obligations. On the surface, it looked like progress, but something essential was missing. Urgency. Presence that comes from fear of loss, not from obligation. Claire noticed it immediately. She appreciated the effort, but she could feel the difference between someone who tries and someone who changes. Between attention given out of guilt and attention given out of desire. One evening, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, she realized something painful and freeing at the same time. He was finally showing up, but she had already begun to leave. Not physically, emotionally. The space inside her that once waited for him had gone quiet. She no longer replayed conversations in her head, no longer wondered how to explain herself better, no longer hoped that this time he'd understand. Hope had burned out, and without hope, there was clarity. A few days later, she asked him to walk with her. They didn't choose a destination. They never did anymore. The city moved around them, people talking, cars passing, life continuing without regard for what was about to end. She stopped near a small park. "I don't think we're broken," she said softly. "I think we're finished." He felt the words hit harder than anything she'd said before. Finished. Not failed. Not ruined. Just done. He wanted to argue, to promise more, to swear he could be different, better. But then he looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't angry. She wasn't accusing him. She wasn't begging. She was calm. And that calm told him everything he needed to know. "You deserve someone who doesn't need reminders," she continued. "Someone who notices when you're quiet. Someone who chooses you without being asked." "And you?" he asked. She took a breath. "I deserve to feel wanted without explaining why." They stood there for a long moment. He realized something devastating then. He hadn't lost her because he didn't love her enough. He lost her because he loved her too passively. They hugged. Longer than the last time. Tighter. Honest. The kind of hug that says thank you instead of don't go. When they let go, she smiled. A real one this time. "I hope you don't do this again," she said gently. "Not with the next person." "I won't," he replied. And for the first time, he believed himself. She walked away slowly. He didn't follow. Not because he didn't want to, but because he finally respected her choice. Weeks passed. The apartment felt larger than before. quieter, empty in a way that echoed. At first, the loneliness was sharp. Then it became reflective. He began noticing things he'd ignored for years. How often he escaped into work. How rarely he sat with discomfort. How easily he assumed love would wait for him. It doesn't. Love grows where it's fed. One night, months later, he stood at the window watching the city lights flicker below. He didn't feel regret the way he expected. He felt understanding. Some people come into your life not to stay, but to teach you how to be better for someone else. And some lessons only arrive once it's too late to apply them where you wish you could. He picked up his phone and deleted her number. Not out of bitterness, out of respect. Because loving someone sometimes means letting them remain a chapter, not reopening the book. He turned off the lights and sat in the quiet. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't afraid of being alone. He was afraid of never noticing again. And that fear, finally, felt like growth.